There's a young man living in Miami who has the Rock's eyes, his smile, and a birth certificate that could unravel Hollywood's biggest family secret. But when DNA results finally arrived, they revealed something far more shocking than anyone imagined. March 15, 2023. Downtown Miami. The law offices of Morrison Associates hummed with quiet efficiency, but the tension in conference room B was thick enough to cut with a knife. 25-year-old Marcus Rivera sat across from three of the most expensive lawyers in Florida, his hand steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. The manila folder in front of him contained documents that could either make him incredibly wealthy or destroy him completely. Birth certificates, hospital records, photographs, and most importantly, a DNA test that had taken him 3 years to work up the courage to order. "Mr. Rivera," said attorney Janet Morrison, her voice carefully neutral, "before we proceed, I need to ask you one more time, are you absolutely certain you want to pursue this claim?" Marcus looked down at the photograph he'd placed on the polished conference table. It showed a young woman with kind eyes and a nervous smile, holding a newborn baby. Written on the back in faded ink, "Dwayne's son, born February 14, 1998. He doesn't know yet. Maria." His mother, Maria Rivera, had died in a car accident when Marcus was 12 years old. It wasn't until he was cleaning out her belongings that he'd found the box hidden in her closet. A box filled with letters she'd never sent, photos she'd never shared, and a secret she'd taken to her grave. "I'm sure," Marcus said quietly. "I've spent 13 years wondering who my father really was. My mother told me he was a traveling businessman who died before I was born. But the man in these photos, that's not a businessman. That's Dwayne Johnson. And I think it's time he knew I existed." What Marcus didn't know was that 2,800 miles away in Los Angeles, Dwayne Johnson was about to receive the phone call that would turn his carefully constructed world upside down. The call came during what should have been a routine Wednesday morning. Dwayne was in his home gym, pushing through his legendary 4 a.m. workout, when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Normally, he'd let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something made him answer. "Mr. Johnson." The voice was professional, clipped. "This is Janet Morrison from Morrison Associates in Miami. I'm calling regarding a very sensitive legal matter that requires your immediate attention." Dwayne paused his workout, sweat dripping onto the phone screen. "What kind of legal matter?" "Sir, I represent a young man named Marcus Rivera who believes you may be his biological father. He has documentation dating back to 1998 and has requested a paternity test. I'm calling as a courtesy before we file any formal paperwork." The weight Dwayne had been lifting crashed to the floor with a sound that echoed through the gym like a gunshot. 1998. He knew exactly what that meant. Miami. Spring break. A wrestling event that had gone longer than expected. A beautiful nursing student named Maria who'd approached him after the show. One night that he'd convinced himself meant nothing, in a time when he was young, reckless, and still figuring out who he wanted to become. "Mr. Johnson, are you still there?" Dwayne's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. What does he want?" "Initially, he just wanted to know if you were his father. But given your current financial status and public profile, we'll need to discuss the legal implications. Can we schedule a meeting?" That night, Dwayne sat in his car in the garage for 3 hours, staring at his phone and trying to figure out how to tell Lauren that their life was about to implode. How do you explain to your wife that there might be a 25-year-old son you never knew about? How do you tell your daughters that they might have a half-brother who's been living his entire life without knowing who his father was? But before he could tell his family, Dwayne needed to know the truth himself. The DNA test was arranged through a private lab that specialized in high-profile paternity cases. Marcus provided his sample in Miami, while Dwayne had his blood drawn by a discreet medical team in Los Angeles. The results would take 7 business days, 7 days that felt like the longest week of Dwayne's life. During that week, Dwayne hired the best private investigator in the country to learn everything he could about Marcus Rivera. What he found made the situation even more complicated. Marcus wasn't some opportunistic con artist looking for a payday. He was a paramedic in Miami, working 12-hour shifts to support himself through nursing school. He lived in a modest apartment, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and had never once tried to capitalize on his resemblance to one of the world's biggest movie stars. More importantly, Marcus was good. His supervisors described him as dedicated and compassionate. His instructors said he was brilliant but humble. His neighbors called him the kind of young man who shoveled snow for elderly residents and returned lost wallets with the cash still inside. The investigators' report included photos of Marcus at work, at school, and with friends. In every single image, the resemblance to a young Dwayne Johnson was unmistakable. The same intense eyes, the same quick smile, the same powerful build that suggested strength carefully controlled. But there was something else in those photos, something that hit Dwayne harder than any physical resemblance. Marcus had the same look in his eyes that Dwayne remembered having at that age. The look of someone who was working twice as hard as everyone else because he felt like he had something to prove. The look of someone who'd never had an easy path but refused to let that break him. On March 22, 2023, the DNA results arrived via encrypted email. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. Dwayne Johnson was staring at scientific proof that he had a son he'd never met, never supported, never even known existed. The first emotion that hit him wasn't panic or fear, it was overwhelming guilt. For 25 years, while he'd been building his empire and becoming one of the most successful entertainers in the world, his son had been struggling to make ends meet, working his way through school and wondering why he'd never had a father. The second emotion was something he hadn't expected: pride. Because despite growing up without support, without advantages, without even knowing his father's identity, Marcus had become exactly the kind of man that Dwayne would have been proud to call his son. But the third emotion was pure terror. Because this secret had the potential to destroy everything he'd built, not just his career but his marriage, his relationship with his daughters, and his reputation as a family man. That night, Dwayne did something he'd never done before. He called in sick to a movie set. For the first time in his professional career, The Rock was too emotionally devastated to work. Instead, he sat Lauren down in their living room and told her everything. 25 years ago, before I met you, before I understood what love really meant, I made a mistake, he began, his voice shaking. But that mistake, it created something beautiful. It created a person. And I never knew. Lauren's reaction surprised him. Instead of anger or betrayal, her first emotion was heartbreak, not for herself but for Marcus. Dwayne, she said softly, there's a young man out there who spent his entire life wondering why his father didn't want him. You can't let him spend one more day thinking that. But what about us? What about the girls? What about doing the right thing? Lauren interrupted. What about the values you've taught our daughters? What about the man I fell in love with, who always said family comes first? That conversation led to the most difficult decision of Dwayne's life. Not whether to acknowledge Marcus, Lauren was right about that, but how to handle a situation that could destroy the privacy and security his family had worked so hard to maintain. The meeting was arranged for April 5, 2023, at a private estate outside Miami. Dwayne flew in on a chartered jet, accompanied only by his lawyer and a security team sworn to absolute confidentiality. Marcus arrived exactly on time, driving his old Honda and wearing the kind of simple clothes that spoke of someone who'd never had money to waste on image. When he stepped out of his car and saw Dwayne waiting on the steps of the estate, both men froze. The resemblance wasn't just striking, it was undeniable. They had the same build, the same facial structure, even the same way of standing with their weight slightly forward, as if ready to leap into action at any moment. But more than the physical similarities, there was something in Marcus's demeanor that reminded Dwayne of himself at that age. Nervous but determined. Respectful but not intimidated. This wasn't a young man looking for a handout, this was someone who'd spent years building up the courage to find his father. Mr. Johnson, Marcus said, extending his hand. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Dwayne shook his son's hand and felt his world shift on its axis. Please, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Call me Dwayne. The conversation that followed lasted 4 hours. Marcus showed Dwayne the letters his mother had written but never sent, photos of himself growing up, and school records that painted a picture of a young man who'd excelled despite every disadvantage. But Marcus also made something clear from the beginning. He wasn't looking for money, fame, or a place in the spotlight. I don't want anything from you, he said simply. I just wanted to know who I was. My whole life I felt like half of me was missing. I needed to know where I came from. Dwayne listened to his son's story with growing amazement and regret. Marcus had worked his way through high school while caring for his sick mother. After she died, he'd lived with relatives who made it clear he was a burden. He joined the paramedic service at 18, working full-time while putting himself through community college, and was now just months away from completing his nursing degree. I've always wanted to help people, Marcus explained. Growing up without much, it makes you notice when other people are struggling. I figured if I couldn't have a perfect life, at least I could help other people when their lives weren't perfect. That's when Dwayne realized something that changed everything. his son hadn't just inherited his physical features. He'd inherited his heart. The conversation eventually turned to the future. Marcus was clear that he didn't want to disrupt Dwayne's life or cause problems for his family. He didn't want media attention or money or any kind of public acknowledgement. He just wanted to know his father and maybe, if Dwayne was willing, develop some kind of relationship. "I don't expect you to suddenly become my dad," Marcus said. "I'm 25 years old. I've made it this far without a father figure. But maybe we could be friends? Maybe I could get to know the man who gave me half my DNA." Dwayne's response surprised even himself. "What if I told you I didn't want to be your friend?" Marcus's face fell, but he nodded with the dignity of someone who'd learned to handle disappointment. "What if I told you," Dwayne continued, "that I wanted to be your father? Real father. The kind who shows up, who supports you, who's proud of everything you've accomplished and wants to help you accomplish more." The tears that followed were earned by 25 years of separation and a lifetime of questions finally answered. But the most emotional moment came when Dwayne called Lauren from the estate. "Honey," he said, "I need you to meet someone. Someone who's going to change our lives in the best possible way." 3 days later, Marcus flew to Los Angeles to meet his stepmother and half-sisters. The Johnson family had prepared for awkwardness, tension, maybe even resentment. Instead, they found a young man who was grateful, humble, and genuinely excited to discover he had sisters who wanted to know him. Simone and Jasmine's reaction to having a big brother was pure joy. Marcus's reaction to suddenly having a real family was something close to wonder. "I've never had siblings before," he told them over dinner. "I always wondered what it would be like to have people who had to love you even when you annoyed them." The integration wasn't without challenges. Marcus had to adjust to suddenly having financial security after a lifetime of struggle. The family had to learn how to include someone who'd lived his entire life outside their world. And Dwayne had to figure out how to be a father to a grown man who'd already raised himself. But perhaps the biggest challenge was keeping the secret. Dwayne made the decision not to go public with Marcus's existence, at least not immediately. The young man had lived his entire life in privacy, and he deserved the chance to decide for himself when and how to reveal his connection to one of the world's most famous families. Instead, Marcus quietly became part of the Johnson family's inner circle. He finished nursing school with Dwayne and Lauren in the audience at his graduation. He started joining family vacations and holiday celebrations. He moved into a nicer apartment with some discreet financial help, but kept his job as a paramedic because it was his calling, not just his occupation. The secret arrangement worked perfectly for 8 months. Marcus got to know his father and develop relationships with his new family members, while maintaining the normal life he'd built for himself. Dwayne got to experience the joy of watching his son thrive, supporting his dreams and making up for lost time. But in December 2023, everything changed. Marcus was working a late shift when his ambulance was called to a multi-car accident on I-95. One of the victims was a young woman whose car had been crushed between 2 semis. She was conscious but trapped, bleeding internally and fading fast. While his partner worked to stabilize her vitals, Marcus crawled into the wreckage to keep the woman conscious and calm during the 45-minute extraction process. He held her hand, told her jokes, and promised her that she was going to see her family again. She survived. The doctors said that without Marcus's emotional support during those critical minutes, she probably would have gone into shock and died before they could get her to the hospital. The woman's father was a local news reporter who insisted on doing a story about the paramedic who'd saved his daughter's life. Marcus tried to decline, but the reporter was persistent, and eventually Marcus agreed to a brief interview about the importance of emergency medical services. The segment aired on December 18, 2023. It was supposed to be a feel-good local news story about everyday heroes. Instead, it became the revelation that shocked the entertainment world. Within an hour of the broadcast, social media was buzzing with side-by-side photos of Marcus Rivera and young Dwayne Johnson. The resemblance was too obvious to ignore, and speculation exploded across every platform. By the next morning, entertainment reporters were camped outside Marcus's apartment building. TMZ was offering 6-figure sums for an exclusive interview. Tabloids were running headlines like "Rock's Secret Son" and "Hidden Heir to the Empire." Marcus called Dwayne in a panic. "I'm sorry," he said. "I never wanted this to happen. I can deny everything, say it's just a coincidence." "No," Dwayne interrupted. "No more secrets. No more hiding. It's time for the world to know who you are." The press conference was held 3 days later at the Rock's production company headquarters. Dwayne appeared with Lauren, his daughters, and Marcus, presenting a united family front. "I want to introduce you to someone very important," Dwayne began. "This is Marcus Rivera. He's 25 years old, he's a paramedic and nursing student in Miami, and he's my son." The revelation sent shockwaves through Hollywood and social media, but the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Instead of scandal or controversy, people saw a heartwarming story of family, forgiveness, and second chances. Marcus handled the media attention with the same grace and humility he'd shown in everything else. When reporters asked if he was planning to pursue acting or entertainment like his famous father, he smiled and said, "I've found my calling saving lives. That's all I've ever wanted to do." When they asked about financial inheritance or business opportunities, Marcus was equally clear. "My father has already given me the greatest gift, a family. Everything else is just details." The story that could have destroyed The Rock's reputation instead enhanced it. People saw a man who'd stepped up when he learned about his son, a family that had welcomed a stranger with open arms, and a young man who'd achieved remarkable things despite growing up without advantages. But perhaps the most touching moment came during Marcus's first public appearance at a movie premiere with his famous family. A reporter asked him what it was like to suddenly discover he was related to one of the world's biggest stars. Marcus thought for a moment, then said, "For 25 years, I wondered if my father was ashamed of me, if that's why he wasn't around. Now I know he just didn't know I existed. And I think he's proud of who I became without him. That means everything to me." Today, Marcus Rivera has become something unique in Hollywood, the child of a major celebrity who's carved out his own path completely separate from entertainment. He finished nursing school and now works as a trauma nurse while pursuing his master's degree in emergency medicine. He appears occasionally at family events and charity functions, but he's never leveraged his connection to Dwayne for career advancement. Instead, he's used his newfound platform to advocate for emergency medical services funding and healthcare access for underserved communities. The Rock frequently talks about Marcus in interviews, but not as a celebrity son, as a healthcare hero who happens to be his child. "I've had a lot of accomplishments in my life," Dwayne said during a recent talk show appearance. "But my proudest moment was meeting my son and realizing that even without my guidance, he'd become exactly the kind of man I would have hoped to raise." The secret heir to The Rock's empire turned out to be someone who wasn't interested in the empire at all. He was interested in something more valuable: family, purpose, and the chance to save lives. Marcus Rivera proved that sometimes the most unexpected discoveries lead to the most perfect outcomes. A DNA test that could have revealed a scandal instead revealed a love story, the story of a father and son who found each other across 25 years and discovered that blood isn't just about genetics. It's about the bonds you choose to build after biology brings you together. The young man with The Rock's eyes and smile didn't inherit his father's empire. He inherited something better: his father's heart. And he used it to build a legacy of his own, one life saved at a time.